Geshe Mikte Owa Hiroku Namda Shin La Chupashu. By the merits of having offered this mandala to Lama Tsongkhapa and his two sons, may I, my family members, and all sentient beings be able to meet, practice, and actualize the teachings of the victorious one, Losam Drakpa, who had a morality of eminently pure way of life, was courageous in the extensive conduct of the son of the victorious ones, and accomplished the yoga of two stages of the supreme bliss and emptiness. Idang Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniyatayami. By the force of having fervently requested in this way, hollow beams of white light are emitted from the hearts of the perfect pure father and sons, and combining into one, enter my crown. White nectar, the color of milk, flows from the opening of the tube of white light, cleansing all my sicknesses, spirit harms, negative karmas, obscurations, and their imprints without exception. My body become as pure and clear as crystal. So we will recite the 5-line Miktsima. If I found where it is. Page 13. All right. There it is. Mimete wete chen chen rezi, dreame kienbe wambo jampe yan, dusu malu jumse sanweda, kanche kienbe tsungyen tsongapa, lo sandra pe shabla sowa de, mimete wete chen chen rezi, dreame kienbe wambo jampe yan, dupu malu jumse sanweda, kanche kienbe tsungyen tsongapa, lo sandra pe shabla sowa de, mimete wete chen chen rezi, dreame kienbe wambo jampe. Doso malu jombe sangweta, kanchen kembe tsugyen tsongkapa, losan trape shabla soande. Sangye chedan tsojin chonum la, chanche pardu dani kyabsu chi, dagi chushi jibin tsonum gi, drola penche sangye rupara sho. Sangye chedan tsojin chonum la, chanche pardu dani kyabsu chi, dagi chushi jibin tsonum, drola penche sangye rupara sho. Sangye chedan tsojin chonum la, chanche pardu dani kyabsu chi, dagi chushi jibin tsonum gi, drola penche sangye rupara sho. Kangi tuzenye zonde tawa tamche pambi chere tambi chun denze kwadam jela chance lo. All right, so I'm just going to repeat my message for the people at home because I think that I was on mute, so apologies for that. So it seems that we have a licensing problem with Zoom, which hopefully we will resolve later on today. But if the session disconnects after half an hour, then please reconnect. I will open the session again if that happens.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. 양아다 가진 참디는 마 슈히스라 가진 참디 지다 깨뷰 ngosong 세티 될 때는 겹순 주 율세저라 될 때는 겹순 주될 때는 겹순 주 율니나니 다리 쉐디 겹순 주 율ngosong티 and dini chagdus.
So we've been looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's middling presentation of the states of the path of enlightenment, and the section that we are currently focusing on in the text is teaching refuge. Now, of the 4 main points in the outline for going for refuge, we've covered the first one, which identifies the causes for going for refuge. And today we're going to pick up on the second point, which is identifying the objects of refuge.
지단 땅이 쉬고가 말았으라. 그래서 겸드로 디 지단기 ran suzuki pi kyawil ya kyabs roya di nganzu namba chibu mayin ba chulu shamba chola ya ta yungu yorwas ra ina ya kyabs ro chigi yo ba ina ya kyabs ro yul di tan dragi yo marwas ra an nambi gi ta pi sonde dire sanji chodan gendyon de tarban deban nam kyab se ti ra nganzu namba sanji bi gi ani kyabs ro se gi kyawu di 산지체 겐든섬 뜻이다 두다 쳐봐 디레스로.
So the word for refugee in Tibetan is kamdro, that can also be translated as seeking a sense of protection. So to seek protection in that sense, we seek refuge, is not something that is found only in the Buddhist tradition, but also in other traditions, other religions, other spiritual traditions. People are looking for or searching for a sense of protection. What we identify here within the Buddhist tradition in terms of seeking a sense of protection when we go for refuge is the objects that we use in our process of seeking protection. This is what you could say, this is what differentiates the Buddhist tradition from other traditions, the objects of refuge. So in the Buddhist tradition, we have the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And as it says in scriptures, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha are objects of refuge for those who wish for liberation.
친한기 캐버디 치온디 넘버 많이 비 캐버디 아니 깜주고니 지그레스 로 깜주고니 제세 비기 직겹위래야 겹순 저거 잠지기 많이 봐 겹위 캐버와 지 샤치니 아니 텔람 겹수주 깜주지 토니 아니 남비기 산점 생고여 반자 디 개체슈 로 간지 냠낸 징에 람름 공에 로종 비기 간지 딘디 징에질이야 개체슈디 아니 껴율 딩원 진투고야 빼마서 개체 묻차고 그랬어.
It is an important point to us because if you practice the Lamrim tradition, the tradition of the steps of the path of enlightenment, or you practice mind training, what differentiates your practice from non-Buddhist practices in general, when we distinguish between Buddhists and non-Buddhists, outsiders, insiders, and so forth, where the demarcation is in terms of going for refuge. In that, if you go for refuge, then your practice of the Lamrim or your practice of mind training become a Buddhist practice, whereas if you don't go for refuge, then it does not become a Buddhist practice. But then in making such distinctions, it's not that we just in general make that distinction between going for refuge and not going for refuge. We do it in a way that is more specific. We distinguish our practice in terms of the objects that we go for refuge to. The objects that we use for going for refuge will make a difference in terms of a practice of the steps of the path of enlightenment or mind training, turning them to be Buddhist practices. So therefore, the topic of refuge and recognizing the objects of refuge become paramount to your practice.
제다 지단 당이 더 쉬고 말스라 간두 스타 잠블링 네처 당아주 잠블링 나게 미츠 카르카르 지기에메다 간주 온숨 통고다스 디지디게 피기기 다치 추 켈랭에 총은 추 지온디게 아니 초버 피사데 겹수시사게 유려야 단자 멘데딘디 더 용고다스라 베나다치 아니 신동 순전이 용구여리라 아니 돈로 용구여리 아니 지 피기 다치 루 차시 드라만달이야 간지 아니 가서다 처버 피사움 깨위 딘디지를 샤치니 베 아니 대바치데 딘디 베 망부 용구어스 다 디기 텔레야 대바치 텔레야 겹주니 디기 랑기 가리 지 아니 푸기 드비전 되는 가리리 아니 딘디지 드위알에 로버치 투로 문도에 싸움당과 디키치무 슈지로 와서
chegelade shindon dan tundro dela sabadende 갑수들이
지단
배셔
요리라고.
권유 요소만에.
그래. 지단 요리스티.
So in general, when we go for refuge in different spiritual traditions, you can see that there are different objects of refuge. There's spiritual traditions, for example, where people go for refuge to forces of nature. For example, go for refuge to trees and so forth, go for refuge to animals and the like. So here, when we go for refuge in Buddhist way, there is an importance that is placed on correctly identifying what the objects of refuge are.
데레베나당 안주 지 아니 직된 거보고 샤치 라 직된 거보고 샤치 델레 옆에 룽아 익상 그 겹쳐 될 소보 또 참말로 아니 직버차고 그랬어.
Or if we look at something that we might be more familiar with in traditions that propound a creator God, then the objects of refuge becomes a creator God.
그래서 다 갑디 람람 나올래야 겹이 시원디 산지치 견든 숨 샤치 디 쪼디 비기 겹된 보고 산지 아니 겹무 아니 추군조 아니 겹 트비 다로디 견든 군조라야 샤치 디스물야 겹수조니 아니 겹수고 럼바디 아니 더 신고야데 그 세슈 디차고 그랬어.
So here in the Buddhist tradition, objects of refuge become the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. An understanding of what they are, what the Buddha is, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, for us become very important.
데다디 진데 겹이 응어송 니발레 니스 겹이 응어송 텔 겹순데 균제 당번이 되바장 압주발레 간실라니 니바군 땐니 용 명아시 간라 넘버 탐제도 용된 탐제 내기바 가데 셈시 연하니 대닐라니 겹도시 대도 되는 거 같아 대이된라 네비릭 셰송바따 겹다 겹마이번 제비 루시 연하니 소메비 겹 산지점 된데라 겹순저와 릭소스.
So with that in mind, we're going to turn to the text and pick up from the section that identifies the objects of refuge. So there are two main points in that section: identifying the objects of refuge and the reasons why they are worthy to be refuges. Now we begin with identifying the objects of refuge in drawing from praise in 150 verses. And it says, to one in whom perpetually all thoughts are definitely absent, to one in whom in every manner all excellent qualities abide. In case someone like that exists, it's right to go for refuge to him, to praise him, to attend to him, to abide in what he teaches. Thus, if someone has the intelligence to differentiate between what is a refuge and what is not a refuge, it is appropriate for him to go for refuge to the undeceiving protector, the blessed Buddha. This also characterizes the Dhamma jewel and the Sangha jewel.
산지 최단 견도는 타원 대반남 겹시 송바들이 송거라다.
And when it says that this also characterizes the Dhamma jewel and the Sangha jewel, we draw from the 70 verses on going for refuge, which say Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha are the refuges of those who want liberation.
데르다 니 돔로디 안간주기 깜루 최고야 거버 견센디 안다 겹조사기 율 아니 겹수드위 럼바 찬상디 지단 직진 디 토니 아니 송구여러 왔으라 안주 겹수드위 거든 조 가르스는디 안주 대원 되버다 동하면 되바 인자 동할 트러비기 타비 공반디 안주 아니 지 드브샤조디 아 동하 탐질 트러비기 타비 공반디 드브샤 인자 덴지기 동할 겹비기 겹 통인기 겹디 아니 산주치 견두스 임바 델야 겹 손니 델리 겹 투비기 비기다지 균센지기 여러스로 어딘지 삼비토니 아니 겹이 군조 송어손니 겹르 셔바이나 다 겹르 남다디 차고레스.
This couple of verses that we read, particularly the last one that says the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha are objects of refuge for those who want liberation or are seeking liberation, not only identify the causes, not only identify the objects that we go for refuge to, but also the reasons for going for refuge. And if you wonder, why are we going for refuge? Well, we go for refuge because we seek happiness and we don't want to experience suffering. And the set in which we have the happiness that we seek and we do not experience the unsought suffering that we wish to avoid is the state of liberation. And therefore, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha have the ability to grant us the state in which we're free from suffering and have that long-lasting happiness. And therefore, there is a reason for going for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Which means that when we go for refuge, we don't do that with the mind that is seeking something that belongs mainly to this life, such as, for example, happiness or pleasure, limited to this lifetime only. Or it's not that we seek fame and reputation and wealth, possessions, and so forth, things that are limited to this lifetime only. We go for refuge because we want to attain the state of liberation. So this is something that we have to know, that we have to understand in relation to the reason for going for refuge.
There's a dindiji and Shintubaina and Kanji Dungar Sebalaya, Dungar le Trovigi, Dungar le Tortungi, Gabdi, the Gabi Conjosumlaya, Niba Yobadi, Tontubaina, Tini, Kong de Sanji Chomden de la Gabsudrova, Rigri Sagi, Rig Sag, Gunzen Tonguri said, Gunzen Tontuguri said. Sanji Chomden de la Gabsona, Dungal Tortubita, Nibaniadi, Tini Unguris, and Chula Gabsona, Dungal Tortubi, Nibaniba dia, Tini Unguris, or Dindiji Sunguasares.
And therefore, the conclusion that we come to in relation to going for refuge is that it is reasonable to go for refuge. There is a reason for going for refuge. It is admissible or reasonable for going for refuge because they have the ability to protect us from suffering. Through understanding that reason, we develop certainty in their ability to give us the protection that we seek.
Kanzana Dunghali Trovichedu, and it keeps Droguyabadi, Benangan, the Lamzo Nalolaya, and it Shuda Choshi Gungikir, Dogan Legin Chiwan Tambedam, Danzin Chaji Tavi Bosus, Marim Mazin Kunintu, Dungasun Gunche Meba, Narseg, Tanda di Kazasaga Davinimo, Javarmuchigi, Mixe Chick Sons.
So when we go for refuge in seeking protection from suffering, it is just like Lama Tsongkhapa says in his 3 principal aspects of the path, a text in which a text that Lama Tsongkhapa, a text that Izone Dalai Lama taught on the 15th of Sakadawa. So it says, swept away by the currents of the four powerful rivers, tied by the tight bonds of karma, so hard to undo. Caught in the iron net of self-grasping, completely enveloped by the total darkness of ignorance, endlessly reborn in cyclic existence, ceaselessly tormented by the 3 sufferings. So we go for refuge because we want to be free from all the types of suffering which Lama Tsongkhapa describes in this section of his 3 principal aspects of the path.
Terdadi Chitangi Lamzu Ma Shong, any Lamjitsu Namsumlaya. Jan song digi sigje di toni ani chanju sem kedangi rimbadilia yongdalaya di jargores the ina tanda song nan singi ani shuda choji yi dogalin chu 당진짜지 타베 보스 마리메 마신코는 툼치네 동아송기 균체메비 네츠디 디 아니 수수 띵라야 수잖아 수수 띵라야 수잖아 아니 타바 인종기 상바 라 인종 계단 그런바디 용거 여바다 세부 쇼지리 디자르고스 딘디 송송스 수수 띵라 상바이나 아니 인종 계바다 디 아니 강사 셴라바 심진 셴라바 칼로니 상로 땅바이나 아니 인지 계술다 베티 띵 삽슈데 아니 데니 퇴근도 슨 야오름지 가서 디지 송송스.
There's a couple of verses coming from Lamrim Kappa's three principal aspects of the path belong to the section of generating bodhicitta. But then if we apply it to ourselves, begin with thinking of our situation, how we are being swept away by the currents of the foul powerful rivers. We are tied by the tight bonds of karma, so hard to undo. We can use that as a basis for developing the determination to live cyclic existence. So in relation to ourselves, when we apply those verses, we develop renunciation. Then we can shift the focus to other living beings and apply just the same in developing a sense of compassion and compassion to them. His Holiness the Dalai Lama in his teaching explained the way to reflect upon these two verses, first of all in relation to oneself in developing renunciation, and then doing just the same in developing compassion by focusing on other living beings.
네급 텐던 규에 만남기 세운디 아니 심진샹라 발자 네급 텐던 규에 다 기슬라바이나 네급 텐던 규에 다 슬라바나 소소소 잔 어두 상담바이나 빼 아니 슈크침부도스 어디디 송구도스 진짜 나서 디타 디 녀고야 차그도스라.
The third line in verse 8 says, thinking that all mothers are in such a condition. So when we think of all mothers sentient beings, we can use this reflection in order to generate compassion to them. But then we can also say, thinking that I am in such a condition, I can generate the determination to live cyclic existence, right? So this is an important point to be made with respect to these two verses. We can use them in order to, first of all, generate for ourselves the determination to live cyclic existence, and the same reflection can be applied to other living beings in developing compassion towards them.
마리비 제만도 köne 아니 차당 모습이 차당 공개 레사니 다 아니 비기다 동아 규미체디 나르츠디야 안페 아니 띵사부 쇼치니 송고도 아스라 다 딘지지기 힘바디 ngansul de sambayina 아니 동할레 톤도기 sam바디 슈크쳔부 쇼지 용야티 라 라니기 네츠 딘디지 sambayina 라 동할레 리토비 탈비 콤바 톰도기 sam바디 아니 슈크다 용야디 메모가 찍레도스 다신 아니 남가다냐비 마스르자 탐지기 네즈 딘지지 sambayina 대 탐제 동하다든 지마로 냠비기 닌지 고대 슈크쳔부 쇼치 용도 아스라.
The third line says, thinking that all mothers are in such a condition. So, sorry, and the line before that says, ceaselessly tormented by the three sufferings. So we think of the way in which we are tormented by the three types of suffering. And we think about it to that degree in which we say that in all the myriad cycle of cyclic existence, we experience very deep and subtle and also coarse sense of suffering. So these teachings are so profound. They teach us how to develop this strong wish to be liberated from the suffering of cyclic existence once we understand the three types of suffering. Needless to say that through reflecting upon the different types of sufferings that we experience in cyclic existence and how they are without depth and breadth, we can then shift our focus to all sentient beings and use that for developing a strong sense of compassion towards them.
아니 동할레 단두고 로슈다 쇼지 여봐 뭐나 아니지 Samjan Tamje Dungan the Tana Jimaro Nyambi, Ninji Shuchambu Jioba, Samjan Tamje Tenji Machinata, Zawin and Dutamandu some debu. And that Tindichi Kaulaya, that di Sosolaya, Ti Samjan Tamje Dungali tribute, nobody Meba Inza, that dilly tribute, nobody be Tani Cheondi, and a Sanji Yazila Yoba. Tinza Samjan Tamji Chedu, that's Sanji Tomna, Matona Tamandu Samba. Ana Sanjila Kapsta, di Tachiduta, and Sanji Ranaya, Capture in Badi, Niva Nivitonita, Capsun, Drosu Dirigita, Drogo Dasra.
So then when we use this reflection in order to contemplate the suffering of sentient beings and thereby think that I have to do something in order to free them from suffering, at some point a strong wish to free sentient beings from suffering will arise in our mind. And then when we will start thinking of our own ability to do so, we will discover that currently we haven't got the ability to free sentient beings from suffering. Then we will think that the only way for me to be able to become able to free sentient beings from suffering would be to attain the state of Buddhahood. And thereby we will think that therefore, for me, the state of Buddhahood is indispensable. There's no other way for me to move forward other than attaining the state of Buddhahood in order to free sentient beings from suffering.
Rang Shen Dungale Torzu Pashani, Ranye Dungale Tondu Loshu Chamboje, Yon Matuya di Dungar Natsu di Mashiwanki, Dungar Natsu Shingameba, Dungar Naryagi, Gyuzo Pena, Maribala Soba, or Dindi Be, and Shawan to cure the Yoba di Shingameba, Shing maybe Tolaya, Shing you Samsongi, Nargir so the Jenny. Draw the Vicoleta, Dunga Jumicha the Young Daddy, Tichagos, right? Tinza, that Dindichi Mato Mevaina, and it counter Namda said the Kabushuch, Rani Dunga Natsu Deliapit, Piggy, Tachi, and never Nibitoni. That Dunga Deli Tribichedu, and it Kavu Conjosumlaya, that Lodigis, Piggy Tessam Yabuch Yovana, and that counter Namda said the Tini Yunguyos is.
Sorry, I left off something with respect to the explanation of these two lines. So when we understand that we are ceaselessly tormented by the three sufferings, we understand that through understanding the process by which, through being controlled by ignorance, anger and attachment arise. Motivated by anger and attachment, we create actions that promote or that give rise to the three types of suffering, which we experience ceaselessly in cyclic existence. So not understanding this process, not understanding how we are under the control of ignorance, we still find ourselves in which we are tormented greatly by different types of suffering. We are controlled by suffering, we are controlled by ignorance. So we fail to see that. Or even if we think that we have some understanding of that, we might become proud of that in thinking that I've already understood that process, but with that sense of pride, we still find ourselves being tormented by suffering. So what we need to do is to understand that process by which, again and again, through being under the control of ignorance, we perform actions that result in our own suffering. And through the understanding of that process, pure refuge arises in our mind.
There's that Dindi Kavlaya, that Sanjila Kapsu Sony, and Sanji the Kapsu, Kavu Kantas Kap Tugre Soba, Kantas Kapsu Ugre, or Dintigita, and a Kame de Yunguanza, Niba, Kapsu Ubigunze, that Sanji di, Sanji Chugendu Sum di, Kapsu Ubigunzendi, such a Nibatleta, Kapsu Ubigunzendu Songodos, right?
So first of all, we looked at the identification of the three objects of refuge, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Now the next part in the text explains the reasons why they are worthy to be refuges, beginning with the actual reasons.
re nibanis ranin jiba tamjili tro shen jiba le trobi tablaki kon la tuji chembo niri meban juk pen tadamada tamji yiten zabashi en kyapsuela 대양 딘디기다 캐주디 산지 코널 여기 온슈 솔라 메베 대니 꺄빈라스 디셔 템비처다 년도 지겐들라야 꺄스웨소스.
So when we begin with the actual reasons, it says, someone who is one, free of all fear, free from all fear. Two, skilled in means of liberating others from fear. The third reason is steeped in great compassion towards everyone without closeness and distance. And the fourth reason is who works for the welfare of all those who have helped him or do not help him, such as one who is worthy to be a refuge. As only the Buddha has those qualifications, while Ishvara and the like do not, he is a refuge. For that reason, the Dhamma taught by him, as well as the Sangha of hearers, are also worthy to be refuges. So we have 2 minutes left on this Zoom session. So we close this Zoom session now and start another one. So for the people at home, please reconnect in 10 seconds, I reckon. All right.
There's the dinangolaya the shin ranin jiba tamjili tors 꺄스웨비게 외출라야 ranin jiba tamjili troba 아니 shen jiba litrobi tabla케바 콘라 투지 전부 니리메바 대한 비직 랑을 춘 펜다다마다 탐지기 된자버식 고그레 소에 띠다 다 개치시 디레스트라 다디.
Now we began with mentioning 4 reasons that make a Buddha being an object of refuge that is suitable to give us protection. These are really important reasons. The first one is being free from all fears. The second is skilled in the means of liberating others from fear. The third is steeped in great compassion towards everyone without closeness and distance. And the fourth, that he works for the welfare of others, or works for the welfare of all those who have helped him or do not help him.
Terda ran jigba thamjili thor sadi ra ran jigba thamjili thor sadi ta lamrim dindilaya pe khar shawres laundi pena ani nganju chu ani chu jig nanglo ya ta miam ta jig thondro dindiji sayo ba na chu chembudina ta dilliya tembala ya rani chu nala ya rusingi chu kyal singi ji memba ina 아니 랑 양도 아니 추나로다 아니 사르야지 마도 아니 용토야지 요 말아왔어 진짜 아니 랑이 베 추나라야 아니 로싱이 어디다오시 고레스 란 지바탐질을 털어야지.
Now when these reasons are explained extensively in the great exposition of the Steps of the Path of Enlightenment, it is said that to begin with, when we reflect upon the first reason that makes a Buddha being an object of refuge that is suitable to provide protection, a Buddha is someone that is free from all fears. So imagine that you fall into a raging river and you're being carried down by the stream. If someone can pull you out from that river, it needs to be someone that knows how to do that, someone that is free from the fear of being carried away powerlessly by the power of that forceful stream. So similarly, only Buddha, for example, who is freed himself from all fears, has the ability to free others from fear.
랑 동아리 트로버지 팽말 제 동아리 트로비 탑요 베나 산지 점된 디기 아니 동아디 göde geldiğini çoğarıyız. İnza 동아디 göde geldiğini çoğayınza 동아 문진 sombatsamase 동아리 도비기 탑디야 찬찬 송여러스 베나 텐종 그리비 톤다 덴바시 톤이 동아리 트로비기 탑 찬상직 송여라스 다 디 딘디지 매바이나 아니 산길에 겹손이 nganzu dunga le trowi ya yong tu ya ta khagbo shuji chagora ro tab de me ba na kya dungan hongshas la ba na kya chunan hongshas la ba na ya chulya tarya gi tabji ma de na pendos ki choma sons ro.
Now, the second reason is a Buddha is skilled in means of liberating others from fear. So having skillful means in liberating others from fear would mean that a Buddha has the skills of teaching others what they need to do in order to free themselves from all fears. In that it might be that you have acquired that knowledge for yourself, but without having the skills to teach it to others, you'll not be able to benefit them in terms of liberating them from suffering, from fears. So in terms of having the skills to liberate others from suffering, the Buddha taught not only the different types of suffering, but also the cause and conditions that give rise to those different types of suffering. But not only that, also the way to overcome the cause and conditions for these sufferings were taught by the Buddha in his extensive presentation of the Four Truths. So the Four Truths give a complete and full explanation of how not only we are being tormented by the three types of suffering, but also the causes for those suffering and the way to put a stop to these causes for suffering. Without teaching all of this to others, even if you were to go for refuge to the Buddha, without the Buddha being skillful in teaching the Four Truths to others, there would be no protection that we would actually get from the Buddha. So this is a vital point to understand with respect to what makes a Buddha be an object of refuge that is suitable to give protection, because not only a Buddha knows how to become free from suffering, a Buddha is also skilled in teaching the means for being free from for becoming free from suffering.
Delta somebody ta konla tuji chenbo nyeri meban jugba sedi pe masaba kechenbo chikchaga dosra gari shimba ina ya gari yoba ina ya ani chi chagdang chori gi ani shangwa jenji imba ina dipigi gi tamche gi chimi soroji ta chaga maros ko chagdang chori gi shangwa di kyorchi ani gari shiba ina ya di milaya pendo chiga marasro dinri mahimba chagdan chori meba tamchele yape ani inji chembo nyere meba juktungi ani kyab temba bochi gogres.
Now the third reason that makes a Buddha being an object of refuge that is suitable to give protection is that the Buddha is steeped in great compassion towards everyone without closeness or distance. In that the sense of compassion that a Buddha has to living being is unbiased, non-partial, without being subject to attachment to some and aversion to others. If a Buddha had a sense of compassion that is partial, which means only to those that are close to the heart of the Buddha, and excluding those who are distant from the heart of the Buddha would not be an object of refuge that is suitable to give protection.
The Keju Shibadi Pentada Tamji Yutenzaba said, Jidang Konla Tuji Chembo Niri Meban Juba Delia, and it turned the Sangiores. Inaya di Surdu Soya di Neden Shin, Ra Kanji Kavu Delia, Keju the Sangu Yavanza, and it Keju the Kechembo Shu Chaganza, and it Neden Shin Sombares, and it gave Tamazu to dig Deva Jagdus, Ra Mado Kolonji Chembo. 도저히 일이 매바 영이 펜타다마다 탐지 되면증에 딘디 가사치 용쓰고 말했어.
Now the fourth reason that makes a Buddha being an object of refuge that is suitable to give protection is that the Buddha works for the welfare of others. It works for the welfare of all those who have helped him or do not help him, regardless of whether they've helped the Buddha or not. So this reason actually is subsumed under the other reasons that we've spoke of before. It's not that it is a completely separate reason. It's actually, you could say that it's subsumed under the third point, for example, that says that the Buddha has impartial compassion that does not hold some as close and others as distance. But still, in order to emphasize that a Buddha works for the sake of everyone, regardless of whether they've helped the Buddha before. This reason, is emphasized separately. But it's not a completely different point. It's not that you can have, for example, someone that has impartial compassion, that is not subject to anger and attachment, and yet still the work only for the sake of those who have helped them before. It is not possible for someone to work for only those who have helped them before and still to have impartial, unbiased compassion. This is not possible. So although the fourth reason is subsumed under the previous one, still there's a point in emphasizing that very point.
닌지기 로직 여바이나야 닌지 초레와지마도 아니 직권라야 아니 세비기 닌지 디메나 아니 소소라야 직 아니 펜도 칭인치 소소라야 강인지라야 아니 파케제 야부시야 남규 야부데야라 소바체 펜도 체 추마강인지 임바이나 아니 베파직 마랍치야다 남규 두제데야마도 직 대라야 직 펜도가 상로디 용토고mon도스 산게 디마임바 산게라야 베 아니 챙아기 비기라야 견주 챙해줄라야 믹스기 아니 세비토니 아니 시기여서라서 간지 딘디지 샤고르스 간주 꺄빌디.
So now when we think about it in practical means, Geshe says that at least when he thinks about it in relation to himself, a person that has not abandoned anger or attachment, then any sense of compassion that you would have without abandoning anger or attachment will still be biased. So therefore, when you interact with others without having a sense of compassion that is extended equally to all living beings, then you might present yourself in a certain way to those who have helped you before. You might help them or speak to them in a way that is nice. Your body language, your physical expression might be quite nice and caring. Whereas those that you dislike, those that haven't helped you before, you might be more rude to them, more abrupt or abrasive towards them. So Buddha is not like that at all. The Buddha acts with a great sense of care. And you can say that especially to those that that are harmful or a bit abrasive in their behavior.
데레다 간지 닌지 초르빅 닌지 초르와서나문도 아니 로디 촉선 홍바이나 데니 소소레 니버여바디야 아니 촐란드약 로 멜레야 펜타 투야기 아니 니버여바 펜타 투비기 고급니야로 소바 덴디 까울야 고급 추수 땅야 랑 니버 추수 땅야로 소바 디사말로 아니 로 초리바디기 야차갸담 로 초리바디기다 아니 촐라당기 와레스 딘자 로 초리바 도야기 아니 탑 야슈디 아니 닌지 쳔보세야디 콘라야 아니 니리메바 아니 닌지키 투야기 남주디 아니 쇼지 키쳔보 인사레스로.
So when we think about it, a partial sense of compassion, biased compassion is a sense of, that sense of bias is what is putting to waste our ability to be of benefit to others. It puts to waste our ability to extend an equal sense of compassion to others. So personally, we might have the ability to be of benefit to others. Also, we might find the avenue for doing so. We might find those opportunities for being of benefit to others. And yet, because of our sense of partiality, we will put this ability to waste. The best way to prevent wasting our potential, our ability to be of benefit to others, is to develop great compassion, which is impartial in being extended equally to all.
캡수비 외쳐드 송디기 외쳐디 마송야 디기 다 냠랭 네땡 거라서 덴자 당연히 팬도 투비컬이야. 수수원에 지 미질이야 팬도 투비컬도들이야. 팬도 마치바이나 아니 제라 고급디 라르제 마레슬라바이나 야차 갸담바 타 추고 말았어. 야차 갸담바 타 추고 말았어. 패시 마라야기 고급디 마음이 소리지 차시그러스. 인자 소소라야 팬타야기 니바여바. 아니 팬타 투비칼라야 아니 팬타사딜이야 팬타 제자바이나 딘지게 랍칭기 자와디 아니 사마게 바르 아니 수술이야 아니 데고레스 로 소즈냠데 데고레스 산게니 심징기 덴트비칼라이나야 아니 딘지기 자와디 아니 슈그체른 로야지 딘지지 송도 왔어 산기기 송라야
In looking through those 4 points that make the Buddha being an object of refuge that is suitable to give us protection, we are actually being shown here points to apply to our own practice, points to develop in our own practice. Because often when we look at our the way in which we relate to others, the way that we work with others, we might find that we have the ability to be of benefit to others, and yet it's almost like we're trying to make sure that we don't put these abilities into action, in that we shy away from ways of being of benefit to others. We try to avoid being of benefit to others. So rather than shying away, rather than trying to avoid being of benefit to others, if you try in whatever way you can to be of benefit to others, you increase as you go your ability to care for others. You increase your compassion, your ability to be of benefit to others. And when that gains momentum, when it gains power, it will be something that will remain with you all the way to the attainment of the state of enlightenment. And even after that, having attained the state of enlightenment, it will still grow and increase.
samja tamje dewa dengoya dunga da tregoya ani bigi ta dimji ta mallam di nima tawa jagoras inaya sosu penda tuwi khadu delaya ani pendo majibaina ani mallam jaya da sosu bigi woni gi chawa che nimbo di ani gewa sura chawaina godam mundo asra di tabdeng sura ra odiri chagdo di mahimba kanji sosu mallam khan gyawadi nimataba tuzutan mallam gyawadi ani ko tandalaya kitoya yongyalaya ani sosu niba khan yobadi ten rogoya di chagdo sra.
So we wake up in the morning and we correct our motivation with refuge and bodhicitta. We recite the four immeasurables, saying, may all sentient beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes for suffering. So we make such aspirations, and yet during the day, if we come across opportunities of being of benefit to others and we do not use them, then we're just making some aspirations, but we're not following them up with our actions. We're putting up a show as if we are doing great for the sake of others, but it will be just a lip service, just a show. So in order to make sure that that does not happen, we have to make sure that we use whatever opportunity we come across to be of benefit to others, so that our aspirations and actions will accord.
Di olaya teyan sangi konala yogi onchu sola maybe teni gyawin la sonya di ani ji ta shingi ro ani gyawila soba o dindi dilaya ani ji kataya da mera taya geje dindi ke mares ko ngoyo netsu toni ma ani shewondi yimba mamba di she gogros ani panden dawta omanju na lolaya Janjon jiban gyona nyeba me sonya di pigi ani riglam gtoni jingub netsu ma ten la phamni kamen nawandi ani dili gewi gi chik tatsudan ani tonsul dengen chogi ani leya ani pogduk chona ya ani ngala nyeba me sonde o dichago resro
So say the karina
omanju janjon jiban gyona nyeba mes Konang ma soyadi. Re
Nga go to my yang ke dikale kale lam.
Shang Shong Jigban Juna Ngala Niba Miss.
Okay. Then after that, Lama Tsongkhapa says in his this section, as Honored Buddha has those qualifications, while Ishvara and the like do not, he is a refuge. Now, when we say that the Buddha has those qualities, but others like Ishvara do not have this, it's not that here we develop a kind of a sense of loyalty to our tradition and we disparage other traditions. It's not that we claim that we have it all and other traditions have nothing whatsoever. This attitude is a partial attitude. Here, we're using reasons and logic in order to explain how if an object of refuge has those 4 qualifications, that for you becomes a genuine object of refuge. Chandakiri said in his supplement to the Middle Way that if you use a reasoned approach, a rational approach to your explanation, when, for example, you invalidate the systems of others, the philosophical systems of others with reasons and logic, it's not that you accrue a fault just because you have invalidated or damaged their positions. If you use reasons and logic and your reasons and logic work well in that they cannot be refuted, then even if the systems of others are refuted, you do not accrue a fault.
On Direpena, on chu sola mebadi, Karesla on the touch the Yawarum Mambuson Yordini, Nanzun Zambili Nalaya, Chuluk Mambush, Chulu Nalaya, Tadu Young the Mengi Kani, Tadu Young Naloni, and Tadu Ting Young Nalaya, Pig Dungar Gitsawadi, and Numuimba, Numung Gitsawadi, Mariba Yimba. And in Mari begin Zandan di Piggy Shinjulo Yimba and di any you moving netsul Piggy Tombani Dodgin and he said Selni and it tower division but di and it Sanji Shung Konalamado and it Sukana Yomaras Tinza or Dinza and it never di Muyu Netsu Jema Dobi Cholong Geshe but so in Chago Maros.
So then when you look at different traditions and you say that such and such aspects exist in the Buddhist tradition and it doesn't exist in the other traditions, without falling prey to a sense of partiality, it is like, for example, looking at this topic that Lama Tsongkhapa mentioned here in saying that, for example, Ishvara, a Hindu deity, doesn't have those qualifications that make him a suitable object of refuge, but the Buddha has. His Honesty Dalai Lama referred to that before in saying that, well, first of all, when you look at the world at the present, you consider there are many different spiritual traditions. Of those different religions, spiritual traditions, some of them have well-defined philosophies and some of them do not. When you look at those religions that do have a philosophical system, then looking at those different types of philosophical systems and comparing them with those that you find in the Buddhist tradition, from the perspective of Buddhist philosophy, there is an explanation of, first of all, the way in which we experience suffering, because suffering arises from afflictive states of mind, and afflictive states of mind arise from ignorance. And the main type of ignorance that we regard as the source of afflictive states of mind is ignorance, which apprehends an object erroneously. It has an erroneous mode of apprehension. So when you then understand that, and you also develop an insight into reality, you come to realize the way that phenomena exist, you have the ability to completely eliminate the erroneous mode of apprehension of phenomena and thereby bring down ignorance. So that mode of explanation is found only in Buddhist philosophy. It's not found in other philosophies. So when you come to see that, it's not that you maintain this sense of false loyalty, which is a partial sense of loyalty to the Buddhist tradition. It's rather that when you juxtapose different forms of philosophy and see which aspects they have, which aspects they do not have, this way of this explanation of how to completely eliminate suffering based on developing a realization of reality that destroys ignorance is found only in the Buddhist tradition. It's not found in other traditions.
데르다 나즈다 남비 쇼리 셴비게 아니 남발리 셴비게 비기 따드 영행기 따드 삽슈 페시 무득 봤다고 따드 삽슈 차고 와서레스 무득이 쇼나라야 자위기 직 아니 되니라 소바 안 디기디 레야 차드 치즈고 르마직 송요레스 이나야 뉴무 세디 문진 치지니 아니 뉴무 밤비게 타르비 남자디 자원이 튕구여서 말레스 정규에서 말했어. 디산기 위치 에게 토마인비기 계주디 아니 뉴문반에 타워트비 름바 송야디 아니 디차고 왔어요.
Now, when you look at different philosophical traditions in different religions, you find that there are also quite a few sophisticated philosophies in Indian or Hindu schools of thought. So this schools of thought or philosophers, which we call Stirtikas, came up with some sophisticated explanation. For example, when you look at the way that they explain the objects of desire and how objects of desire work in relation to our senses, they do come up, some of them, with quite a subtle explanation, and yet you don't find in their explanation a very detailed explanation of afflictive states of mind and the way to eliminate afflictive states of mind and thereby attain the state of liberation. So such teachings on the elimination of afflictions that makes this state of liberation possible is missing from their explanation, and yet it is still found in the teachings of the Buddha that explain how to attain the state of liberation from suffering through the elimination of afflictions.
안 계란기 깨위 건조섬라야 아니 로디치 뉴바이나 깨위 건조섬 계란 메겨바지 시그마레스 흰 타바는 게 밖에 차디 랑 껴벌 균일이 치규 만사와 메바 템비 주신자 난기 규 르까니 껴순 좀 마총위 동아인 비체로스.
And then Jetsun Kappa moves on to give an advice to be persistent about conviction, the principal cause. And it says that being so, once you have derived certainty with regards to these objects of refuge set forth in the compendium, and the type of conviction or certainty that we develop is the one that is completely certain, is full 100% assured in its reliance upon the objects of refuge. And once you derive that sense of certainty, when you're able to rely on them with a single point in mind, it is impossible for you not to be protected. Therefore, you should generate certainty from the bottom of your heart.
There's that dire da ran kebi gyunile pigi ran dunga tamjeli jishi keb dili kebi nibas konjola yoba yichebase dili kebi niba konjola yungi yorda inaya di yichibi yichigi lo dig mandani kanji yichigi lo di mandandi ani chi pigi keb tempo pogi ani tempo nan shingi lalen la ya tartu yo maras ra di matuk di ani dunga tamji se matukya kanji ani dunga gyumeche de yong de di ani kanji tusa tso di sosola tuk de shas.
Then Aung Kappa says, of the two causes for being protected, which means one,
Is it the freedom of fear that you have when you become a Buddha? Is it because you're free of fear of retaliation? Because you don't have attachment.
All right, so before moving on with your question, Carrie, I'm just going to finish translating for this section. So, so it says, of the two causes of being protected, there is no incompleteness in the external one, our teacher having established it. However, since the internal cause, taking hold of that refuge trustingly, has not come about, we suffer. So we have two causes for going for refuge that we've mentioned. The first one is fear of suffering, and the second one is having trust and faith that the objects of refuge have the ability to grant us this protection. So from the point of view of the objects of refuge, such as, for example, from the point of view of the Buddha, it's not that there is incompleteness in their ability to grant protection. They have all the ability to do so. But then in our mind, it would be still an incompleteness in the sense of our reliance. We might not be relying trustingly upon the objects of refuge, trusting that they have the ability to give us protection. So we still continue to experience suffering because a lack of reliance or diminished sense of reliance upon the Buddha and the Dhamma and Sangha. It's not that they do not have the ability to do so. So this is what Lama Tsongkhapa makes here. Now, Kerry is asking with respect to the first reason that makes a Buddha being an object of refuge is to give protection. It says the Buddha is free from all fear. So then thinking about it in relation to, for example, His Honesty Dalai Lama, a person whom we regard as being a Buddha in actuality. Well, so if someone like that is free from karma, is free from the three poisons, free from anger, free from a sense of retaliation and so forth. We, through karma, through the three poisons, through anger, through wanting to retaliate when we're being harmed, we accumulate more negative actions, more negative karma in relation to that. So thinking that His Honest is free from that, then how can we explain the situation that His Honest experiences, like, for example, Tibetan people being forced into exile or experiencing other forms of suffering. So I was saying that a Buddha, such as, for example, His Honesty Dalai Lama, is free from all fear in the sense that although such situations occur, is free from those states in which he wishes to retaliate. So he gets angry and wants to retaliate and so forth. What is the meaning of being free from all fear? Dila Gyumtsen Temple Sheshto, the Jiva Tamche, the Choa Seshto. The not so Jiva Tamche, le Machoa Insan, not so Lelatene, Nyomuntuk Sumlatene, Hondo Saya, Lelen Taigel Kasa, Dala Kasa, Jashalengi, Dubachi, Wangi, Dunge Mambochi, Nyongerwa, Ane Dilatenian, Peshish, Dunge Tantungengi Maru Sagarwas. In a garden bucheta, also garden buchet, sang moods, Sigi or Wala. Ani sanging moo Sigi on sanging moo, Ani let Tamchel. Tower was Jiva Tamchele Tower was any Chesan Yarin Buchetawu Yarin Buchetawu. All right. Now we have unlimited minutes. That's good. Yarin Buchetawu the Jiva Tamchele. Toasia di Kandachi Shagina, now Duganchi Nyoina, Kondo Masadi Chichagre, Jasha Lane, Dova Mene Tone Shagreves, Kandachi Shaginas.
Yarum Jivatam Jil Troa was.
Yeah.
Was.
Yeah.
Any the inayan do don't the she will car. Ah,
Jet, Penade, Capsu Sanjola Jodo, Sanjola Peche, Peva in the channel. The Rawa maybe Yondo Toledo, they can achieve.
아니 다디 저다 가서다 우유 내출디 산지 추 비다지 신우빈 내출 람드리비즘 바 아니 제부꾼이 세기 딘디게 신람 제부승기 남자 저다 야치 장 장바이마이나 니에사나 디 토바디 용구여 삼을 상고도스 디 마신 디 나란 솔이야 나와 잠기 대응무빈의 솔이야 디 임바지 콜구여라스 인자 상로 딘디지 열 세베질라 아니 도바디 용용 말아오지.
Now Geshe breaks that. First of all, when we think of such qualms, such doubts will be eliminated if we spend a lot of time studying the presentation of the basis, the paths, and the results. The basis, the two truths, the paths of method and wisdom, and the results, the two bodies of Buddha. So we will overcome these doubts if we develop a detailed understanding of these three. But sometimes we still have qualms and doubts because we trust that things exist in the way that they appear to us. So, for example, in relation to is known as Dalai Lama, there is a certain appearance that dawns to our mind, and we assume that things necessarily exist in the way that they appear to us.
Tamkala Tsultrim democratic lo ni to chuge konya zambali le pebikala ya ta ngaran chugi ani je tuya gi number 2 ni mapebna bi mube ne surgi ani 가서 다치 이시 gi ranshin gi ani kusu di ten pebaina nganzu je tuyo maresti 이제 nganzu je tuya gi kusu yutten balaya nganzu lugi gyubja dili tribi kusuji ki toni number 10 pyawandi di tamadela ya pa 가서 다치 아니 kenchi toni pa 아니 number 10 druyoras di nenga chikchagoresra.
So thinking about it in relation to, for example, the historical Buddha that lived in India 2,600 years ago. If we were to meet such a person to teach us the Dhamma, we would need to meet them in a particular form. In the sense that having attained a state of enlightenment, the Buddha can appear in a body that is in the nature of his exalted knowledge. And teaching the Dhamma in the body that is in the nature of exalted knowledge is possible, and yet even if the historical Buddha would have appeared to us in this body, which is in the nature of exalted knowledge, we would not be able to see him. That would be beyond our ability to interact with such a Buddha. And therefore, the only way for the Buddha to teach us the Dhamma is to appear with a physical body, that is a body of flesh and blood, like, for example, the body of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And since they appear in such a form in order to be able to teach us, because we cannot see other forms of body, like, for example, a body which is in the nature of mind, the nature of exalted wisdom. Such a body that we can see appears in a way that is still subject to things such as birth and death.
Then re yaurumchi ani capture la payolis. Yaurumchi capture la pay di pigi jana kontrang shongi and ham shake tone, hambe tone, and chadang tone, and it's purby, and it's kuyu pigi, and yons zobadi, and trochum chival denny, yaurumchi capture la pay with childless. And it did towards some massy, gomba tonta mambu, and it has bunta yame, and 정강의 주고에 주 세고에 세또 인티질 갑돌이야 아니 야월마치 공장 쇼기 따지 동 텐션 간지 야월마치 공농 상여바디 네 켈린 지기메스 이네 동의 텐션이 까면 나지 페고레스 이네 단다 파르드 아니 지 페버 미치기야 아니 비 야미기 쇼응징에 소리야 지 세베기 레가싱이 각제 섬지 주요 말씀을 랍쇼고레스 is a long control sagiyabadi zawni ne druptu marsira ta tindi chijin yawmuchi bi ta ji pyogi saje chinjong din chu yagalongba pemni tanda pardo ani pyogi nanding ki chuzul chima mebadi zambling tolya yongchini zambling mamala ya pendo tuyaji muyen de chayolas ti yawmuchi yagasa dola pebi kadin den tugiyabadi sewu chagorsira.
Now, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and many other Tibetans were forced into exile. When China took over Tibet, it took over the entirety of Tibet with aggressive means, appropriated everything, as a result of which thousands of monasteries were razed onto the ground. Hundreds of thousands of people ended up in prisons and labor camps. So many people have lost their lives. About 1 million people lost their life as a direct result of the Chinese occupation. And as we said, also many fled into exile, His Holiness, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, having taken residence in a, you can say that in a town or a place that was quite small in India. So looking at His Holiness's reaction to that, well, His Holiness at some point held some negotiation with the Chinese government, and Geshe reckons that there was not even a single incident where someone was appointed in order to inflict damage or harm upon China or the Chinese people. It's not that there were deliberate missions of sabotaging or inflicting harm upon others instigated by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So Geshe reckons that first of all, His Holiness did not harbor such malicious intent or intention to harm. And also another thing that we can see is that once they were forced into exile from India, the Buddha Dhamma has started to travel to other parts of the world. So you can say in some sense that now the availability of the Dhamma in so many other places around the world, and the fact that the Dhamma grows and increases, is also, you could say, attributed to the situation that resulted in His Holiness the Dalai Lama going into exile.
And social mangogi, and it's heavy bopigi, and it charge mambo the yamdo, and it yaurumchigi, be and it come and nanchi, Tandi Chalaya, chi and the number sanji, number sanji, tadu, so big, and it's Samgam Rivala Soba, and Tenjong Rivala Soba di, and it shoots out in the Kemelingi, Seri was so in by Naya, Donna Chimbo Chile go a child. And Yaurumji Garden then Choyoris. These are near some Yaurumji only Tanigi, Ran Jivatamji literature, Jen Jiva literature, Tabaki, Yambachimbu, only Tanaresha, Samsung, and same in Titsorgius.
So having left Tibet and gone into exile, now when the Buddha Dhamma is traveling to other parts of the world, such as, for example, this or other parts of the West, you have a great interaction between the Buddhist tradition and foremost academics from different fields of research. So when we have this exchange that is oriented towards either Buddhist psychology or the reasoning of dependent relation, dependent origination, Geshe feels that His Holiness is able to benefit others, not only from a religious perspective, but also from other points of view. And therefore, at least in Geshe's mind, it's just strengthen his conviction in those two reasons that make a certain object be a suitable object of refuge. Someone that is free from all fears, but also is skilled in freeing others from fear.
Nguyo nesu da mentum bigi negachiari Geshe ya karchina tanto ina ya jawrum chigi nganzu nyamdu Geshe gos nganzu dontu ani Geshe gos nganzu chuba gyal zambling nawala ya chuba gyal ne nganzu chigi ya Kevin Rice kiyo maris sabi gi pe lorgi di ku lorgi tone pe de ranzi sama chanje jimba ina ya nganzu jana nyamdu de gos nganzu ranzi tse mayons Nanzula Goya Tsu di Nanzula ya Tomo Maiba Chöda Region Tomo Maiba Zambatling la Pento to Region Yoga di Nanzula ya Songyup Chiag Karanzogi Ramanji Ted and other Shaba kind of Mayons. And don't the Geshe was in Tandaba the Loop, shifting of shooting layer, Yarumachi quality care that we convention killing Mevas. The young answer Shinguage, the Tomo Chiguage, Yaja Yatama Chagoris.
Although in His Honour's interactions with Chinese officials, they're still being dishonest or trying to proclaim things which are untrue. His Honour's Dalai Lama has been insisting that it's still important to have this dialogue, ongoing dialogue. It's still important to make sure that people meet face to face and discuss with each other, that they maintain a dialogue. And he says that even if Tibet was indeed a free country, an independent and free country before, now it is no longer a free country. It is under the control of China, but still, rather than seeking separation from China, it says that it can still remain under the jurisdiction of China and maintain some form of autonomy that can allow them to still practice their spirituality and through that to be of benefit to others. So he's not seeking independence, but he's seeking a genuine autonomy. So that has been his position for the last 40 or 50 years, and he's still maintaining this position and seeking always this direct dialogue between him and the Chinese government.
Lobjong Chechin, Zingyong Person Chingindi, Tandi Chalaya, Tamushevano, and Pigin Antele 2 years. T Mentun in Zambalina, Neguchona, Pigin Nantin Zinging, and Chick Gombakare, Didi, and a chick named Matubana, Zambalina, did not dry, but the Geshe Yatam Chagos. Is it Dindichilia Sichin, Nenga Dindichilia Sichin, Yarumachi Kabjula Pet, and it Pigi convention like donation coming on your mother, and in Kundro Seche, and it's you dash a name so that so in the Chago Martas.
Just like one of the statements of the Buddha was said that do not accept what I say just because you believe in me, the Buddha, but take whatever I say after you have examined it, like you would investigate a nugget of gold in melting it, rubbing it or cutting it and making sure that this is an authentic piece of gold. So this approach to the Buddhist tradition is still very much alive in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. This tradition that promotes a sense of analysis and investigation, like burning or melting, cutting or rubbing a nugget of gold to make sure that it is an authentic piece of gold. Similarly, we should investigate the teachings. So taking that into consideration and seeing that this is the attitude of the principle that is at the very core of the Buddhist tradition, if that would be missing, the Buddhist tradition will not survive, will not prevail when we think of the future. So His Honours is still maintaining this type of approach, even 40 or 50 years, trying to hold negotiation with the Chinese officials, is still maintaining that this dialogue between people would be the solution, looking for the future, but still in saying that such dialogue should be based on analysis and investigation.
아니 추도 냠도 비게 아니 돌린지 다셔체니 로 추타 망불이야 아니 잠바친 진종 뺏을 칭인디 아니 비게 난된 징인 소리 여러 모두 심박 내가 쓰고 세게 봤어 근데 딘티지를 투데여서 간지 잠블링기 안 잠블링기 비게 시디 세대하기 시디기 싸wan 타도거디 딘티지를 투데여서 딘티지를 시치니 꿀리경고 여러 모두 나길 샴파미야기 뒷싸원이 말했어. 그것이 대뜻이야.
So this tradition, which is based on analysis and investigation, just like, as we said, investigating in Nugget of Gold, came from the Indian tradition, where Indian Pandits not only composed texts, they first of all studied other texts, they composed their own texts, they imparted those teachings upon their students, and still maintaining this form of analysis and investigation that is based on dialogue, debate, and so forth. And this system was passed on from the Indian tradition to the Tibetan tradition, and is still alive at this very day. It seems that, in some sense, we can say that it is probably the only tradition that still promotes this form of analysis and investigation. Anyway, having said that, Geshe says, let's leave it here for today. So we're gonna, before we end the session, we're gonna recite the final Lamrim dedication. I'll put it on the screen in a second. For my two collections, vast in space, that I've amassed from working with effort at this practice for a great length of time, might become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds, wisdom, eyes blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, might be held in your loving compassion for all life's Manjushri. May I find the best of complete graded parts of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice, using skillful means drawn by the strong force of compassion. May I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings with the points of the path that I have discerned. May I uphold the Buddha's teachings for a very long time. With my heart going up with great compassion, in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and may the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time by even this present path to enlightenment, complete due to wondrous, virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. May all humans and non-human beings who eliminate adversity and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent paths never be parted in any of their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtues practices, may always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. Thank you very much.